Hello, listeners, and welcome to Teachers Have Issues. Yes, I am your host, LanatheEducator. If you're a first-time listener on this channel, welcome. Here we explore the latest educational trends and tackle pressing issues facing the education sector, conduct insightful interviews with people making a difference, and share stories of triumph and innovation from classrooms around the globe. If you're interested in all of this, then like and subscribe. Today on Teachers Have Issues, yes, we have a very special guest. Paige Briggs is joining us from the United States. Welcome, Paige Briggs.
Hi there.
Thanks again for doing this. Let me tell the listeners a little bit about Paige. So Paige is an educator with over 10 years experience in elementary education. She graduated with a bachelor's degree in education from St. Louis. Is it St. Louis or St. Louis?
St. Louis, yeah.
St. Louis University, magna cum laude in 2013. She later went on to graduate magna cum laude with her master's in education at the University of Missouri, St. Louis,
Yep.
right? With a specialization in reading in 2020. She started her teaching career in 2013 as a lead classroom teacher at St. Joe, Manchester, a small private Catholic school. From there, she made the transition to her current school, Discovery Ridge Elementary, a part of the Wentzville School District. There, she also started as a lead classroom teacher, ranging from grades 2 to 5 in her first few years. Then, after completing a master's degree, she transitioned into a reading interventionist role in 2020, where she began to focus her efforts on leading sessions with small groups of students who need specialized help with the reading skills throughout the day. She has also taken on key leadership responsibilities at her school as part of the school's leadership council, weighing in on areas pertaining to safety, social, and academic issues. Her passion for working with kids who need the most help has shone through on many occasions. In 2014, she was named Teacher of the Year for her efforts in the classroom. Since then, she has continued her goal of empowering the next generation through hands-on teaching. So you guys are hearing the lovely passion, and you will get to hear how lovely Paige is by the end of this podcast. So welcome again, Paige Briggs.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Yay. So what inspired you to pursue a career in education? From reading your bio, it looked like you went in already knowing that you wanted to do this.
Yeah,
You
so
switched careers, yeah.
yeah, that's a good question because actually, when I went to college, I went in undecided. I think I kind of had in the back of my head that I wanted to be a teacher. My dad is a teacher. His whole side practically is teachers. So I guess I kind of grew up around it, but I never really kind of knew. I kind of went back and forth with like, do I want to go the medical route and be like a pediatrician? Do I want to do something like social work? I always knew I wanted to work with kids and helping kids. I just didn't know kind of what avenue it was going to take me. And then after doing just like a couple classes my first semester, I was like, okay, it's teaching. That's what I'm called to do. That's what I want to do. So I kind of switched pretty quick after that, and then I just fell in love with it, and I've loved it ever since. So it's just getting to work with kids every day, and it's not just the academic side, but the relationships you build with them, I think, is just so neat, and it's just empowering for me. And I just like helping kids grow in all different ways.
Yeah, great. So as a teacher, I'm looking at your bio, you have experience across different grade levels from 2 to 5.
Yeah.
So how do you adapt your teaching strategies to meet the developmental needs of students at each stage?
Yeah, so obviously it is different working with, say, kindergartners versus fifth graders. So I've kind of had experience in all the different grades, and it is different. But at the end of the day, it's all about building that relationship with kids and helping them feel safe and respected in the classroom. And then from there, you can kind of really do anything. So I always kind of take it from that stance of no matter where I was, because sometimes I moved by choice to grade by grade levels. Sometimes I was asked to move. And so that's always hard when you really love a certain grade level and you kind of get in your groove of, okay, I know exactly what I'm doing. I know exactly what I'm teaching. I've taught this before. Starting over with a new grade can be challenging because there's new curriculum. It's new, skills that you're being asked to teach. But, I always kind of come with that idea of if you really get to know your students and care about them, then the teaching aspect of it will come along after that. So it is important to study the curriculum and figure out how am I going to teach this, but I think it's also that relationship approach is kind of the most important for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you graduated magna cum laude for both your bachelor's and master's degrees.
I
And that's
did.
amazing.
Thank
That's amazing.
you. Thank you.
Congratulations on that. So did those achievements in any way, and also, having that teaching experience at St. Louis University, shape your teaching philosophy in any way? How
Yeah,
so?
it definitely did. I loved my experience at SLU because they really take an effort to kind of get you into all the different types of schools that we have here in the US. So we did some things in charter schools, we did things in private schools, we worked in the public schools. It was a wide variety of experiences, and just kind of the approach that they take to how they teach teachers really helps you see kind of some of the issues that are in the public education system, and then like how can you help. And so it really kind of your eyes were kind of open to what teaching really is, so you had an idea of, okay, I can do this, I can make a difference, I can help, or it's something that maybe isn't for me. But it was just a really good experience having all of the clinical experiences that we had. We spent time obviously in lectures or things like that in the classroom, but a lot of our time was hands-on working with kids that are needing extra help, or we were tutoring or things like that. So I think getting to work with a wide variety of students really helped me kind of see like, okay, they're all kids at the end of the day, no matter where they come from, and really building that idea of, if you get to know them and figure out what they're interested in, and you kind of bring that into your teaching, then that makes a world of difference in helping them learn too.
Yeah. So did those experiences help you to decide what type of school you wanted to teach at?
It did,
Mhm.
but it also kind of was, when I finished, I was like, okay, I'm going to apply to a wide variety, just
Mhm.
because there's need everywhere. Obviously, there are schools that have a greater need, or a population that has a greater need too. But it was kind of like, where could I start helping immediately? So it's kind of like I applied to a bunch of different places, and it was, I'll start working here and kind of work in different places and see kind of where I end up. I didn't necessarily have a goal in mind of what kind of school. It was really just, I wanted to start working with kids right
Right away.
away.
That's nice. So at your early years in, is it St. Joe, Manchester? I
Yes,
think it is,
yeah.
yeah. What were some of the more valuable lessons you think that you learned as a lead classroom teacher?
I think, a lot of it is classroom management, but a lot of it is too involving the community and things of that nature. It was St. Joe, Manchester was a really small community. It was a really small school. And I grew up in a public school. So
Mhm.
I, had a very large school, lots of kids, and this was very different. And there's also obviously the religious component of it too. But you just see the impact that having an involved community makes on the school, and how that can help make a difference in the classroom and in the lives of the kids. So that was really neat to see, because I feel like I learned like, okay, if we do these community partnerships, and they involve not just parents but other people in the area, then it kind of helps make that education aspect for the kiddos not just in the classroom. It kind of takes it to real life for them too. So we did some projects where we would send letters to different organizations, or partnered with different companies or things like that. So that was kind of neat, because that was something that we kind of had talked about in theory in college, but then when you're actually living it, it's a totally different
Different
experience.
experience.
Yeah.
So why did you choose to specialize in reading? What prompted that?
So that's a good question too. I guess I love to read myself. I read all the time for fun.
Mhm.
And I never really thought of how did I learn how to read. It's just kind of one of those things that you just are reading one day. And so for
Mhm.
people that don't have difficulty reading, I think it kind of just feels the same to all of us. It just comes naturally.
Mhm.
But I've seen, my little sister, she kind of struggled a little bit with reading, and I would kind of help her because I'm trying to think of how much younger she is than me, but there's a big age gap between me and my younger sister. So I was old enough to kind of try to help her with some of her things when she was going through elementary school. And so, just I love reading so much that I wanted to be able to help all kids be able to enjoy reading that much.
Mhm.
And so when I started studying, I was like, oh wow, reading actually isn't something that comes naturally. There's a lot of science behind it. There's a lot of things that have to go right for you to be able to feel like it comes naturally.
Mhm.
So once I started kind of being exposed to that, I was like, oh, that would be really neat if I could try to help make a difference for kids learning how to read so that they can hopefully get to a place of enjoying it as well. So that's kind of how I ended up going down that path.
Mm. So after you transitioned to a reading interventionist role, how did you focus on like small group instruction? How did that impact your students' progress?
Yeah, so I love teaching in small groups. I tried to do it as much as possible when I was in the regular classroom as well, teaching a whole class lesson and then really focusing most of my time working with the small groups just because you can really get to know and help remediate anything that needs to be fixed or challenge the kiddos that need to be pushed further. But it's just amazing how much you can do in a small group. So I've been doing it for 4 years now. And the kids just really thrive when you have, we kept our groups of, I think it was 4 or less. So we really try to keep them to that small group setting. And it's just crazy how much they learn, but also how much you get to know them. And then you can use that to help them learn. So it makes a world of difference when you're able to use those small groups to really figure out what the kids need. And you just learn so much more about them to be able to help them.
But at times I'm sure it must have gotten to be a bit challenging for you. So what might have been some of the challenges you faced as a reading interventionist, and then how did you navigate those?
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the hardest parts is not knowing what to do if it's not working. So it's, you've tried everything that you can imagine, and it still isn't helping the kiddo, or they're feeling defeated, or they're just not seeing the growth that they would like to see. And one of those situations, I always kind of rely on my colleagues. So there's a variety of us, but I try to, pick their brain and figure out, okay, hey, I have this kiddo. This is kind of what we're struggling with. Do you have any ideas or suggestions? And, ultimately sometimes it doesn't help. And so then we have to go down the avenue of, helping that kiddo navigate the special education process. And so it's kind of nice that even if it doesn't work where I'm not able to help them, that I've worked with that kiddo and I can kind of be an advocate for them moving forward of, okay, like how can we get them some extra support? How can we get them some extra services and kind of just see, do they need some other kind of special education help or not? And other times it does work and we get to, help the teachers empower them in the classroom too. But that's kind of one of the hardest things is, when you're working with them so closely, you do get to know them a lot better. And, when things aren't working and it's not helping or we're kind of stuck, kind of figuring out a plan B of what can we do, or if it's really, really not working, then where do we go from there?
So try to explain for us, is it that you started as what we might call a general or typical classroom teacher, and then when you specialize as a reading interventionist, you took on a different role in the school system? How does that work? Yeah.
Yeah. So when I first started teaching, I was just your general education classroom teacher. So I would have classrooms of varying sizes. At St. Joe, the class sizes were a little bit smaller just because it was that smaller school. But when I moved over to the public school setting, we would have classes of 20, 25, just kind of depending. So, and I would teach all subjects to the kiddos all throughout the day. So then when I transitioned into reading intervention, I teach reading all day long, but it's based on the needs of that small group. So we would work to kind of assess the kiddos, figure out, okay, who in our building needs or is falling behind a little bit in reading. They're showing that, some of the things aren't clicking for them. And then we would put them in groups based on, okay, this group is working on long vowels. This group needs to work on digraphs. And then we would kind of build our lessons tailored to that small group so that we could really figure out and nail in on what the skills are that they need to work on. And so then I would see that group for about 30 minutes every day to try to help kind of bridge that gap. And I'd kind of progress monitor throughout the weeks that I would see them and just continually take data to see if they were improving or not. And then if they weren't, we would kind of reassess and kind of go from there. We could switch them in groups. We could change, if there was a group with my teammate, then maybe they could move over to that group. Or, we have success stories too, where they end up transitioning back to the classroom. It's a big partnership between us and the classroom teacher and parents. And just kind of figuring out how to help those kids.
Oh, great. So what strategies do you find to be most effective in helping struggling readers gain confidence and improve their skills?
I think it's really figuring out the areas that they're struggling in and really helping them through that explicit instruction. I think a lot of times when it comes to some of the reading, especially being a general classroom teacher, when I see some of the lessons that we've kind of taught in the past, they weren't explicit enough in terms of teaching the kiddos, whether it's the sounds that the letters make or how this digraph works in a word. It kind of talks around some of the big ideas of how reading works, but it doesn't explicitly tell them how it works. So I think that explicit instruction, but also just that repeated instruction over and over and over again, is really beneficial. And we do a lot of hands-on things too. So ways to help it get into the brain more than just us saying it, and helping them, hoping that they catch on to it and it sticks. So we do a lot of things with like sand, where they would say the sounds of letters and write the letters in the sand. Just trying to bring in all of the different senses into the lesson so that it could hopefully stick in one of those ways. But really it's that repeated exposure. And then, we practice it kind of in a lot of different ways. We would do, part of our lesson would be phonics. So it would be that explicit instruction part. And then we practice it in text and looking for how those different layers of the lesson or the things work. And then they'd apply it in a different way as well. So it's just kind of a lot of different things, but it's that repeated instruction and that multisensory component, I think, that really makes a difference too.
Yeah. So you have your passion for working with the students, and it's coming out in your voice. who need the most help here. How do you maintain that passion and that drive to make a difference every day?
Yeah, I think it really is just getting to know the kids. They're all just little people. And so it's just really getting to know them and their personalities, and figuring out what they love and care about, and just, figuring out ways to help them be the best that they can. And I've always loved working with kids, and now I have two of my own. And so that even, has made me even more like, oh my gosh, I want my kids to have a teacher that cares about them as much, as I do. So just knowing that they're all somebody's kids, they're all our kids. It's just, I really think that that's important to remember, even though there are days that are hard, don't get me wrong, but there's a lot of good in it too. And they want to learn, and sometimes they just don't know how.
So at one point you were named Teacher of the Year, and people know that's a big thing in teaching. Teachers don't often get recognized. What do you think set you apart, in the classroom, and how did that recognition influence your teaching career?
I attribute that a lot to, again, just kind of, I know I've said it a million times, but just that relationship building aspect with the kids. I just feel like that can sometimes get lost in the shuffle of day-to-day teaching. Sometimes, we're overwhelmed with our personal lives. Sometimes we're overwhelmed by things that are going on in the school. Sometimes it's just things that are going on in the world. And we just kind of forget to kind of, at the end of the day, connect with the kids. And I think that that's really the most important part of teaching, because once you do that and they have that respect and you respect them, then you can kind of go anywhere. So I really think that that's kind of where that stemmed from, because I do make that a priority with any kiddos that I teach.
And did this award influence your teaching career, just moving forward in any way at all?
I think it just kind of made me more like aware, I guess, of what I had done and how I wanted to continue doing some of those things. And it kind of just pushed me to continue to, be better, really, because I always like to say that, teachers are lifelong learners. So there's always something I can learn and do better. So it's, not, oh, I got this award, so I'm the best that I can be. It's, I got this award, how can I be better even more so moving forward?
So let's talk a bit about your leadership roles and contributions there. Can you give us some insights into your work on the school's leadership council?
Yeah. So we have the leadership committee at school. And so it's kind of really focusing on the social and emotional aspect of education and how we can help our kiddos grow, not just in our classrooms academically, but just as generalized people. So we would really kind of find ways to give them leadership opportunities in the classroom, but also in the building as a whole. So it was really kind of building that community of our school and making it a positive place for everyone to be. So we would plan different events or different things, help plan assemblies or, ways to recognize kids, and just making sure that we were helping the staff and the students go down a path that was positive for everyone.
So how do you balance that academic, social, and those other issues within your school? How do you balance?
Yeah, it's hard, because there's only so many hours of the day, and you're trying to, sometimes it feels like you're trying to tackle the problems of the world and really,
Right.
make the biggest difference you can. But I think it boils down to when you're in the classroom with the kiddos, utilizing every minute that you can to, set not only a good example by you being a leader yourself, and, modeling those things, but also giving them opportunities to try and fail and help them, learn from that. So it takes the whole building together to kind of build that positive climate of leadership and character. And so I think once everybody's kind of on that same page and working together as a team, it really kind of helps the school day utilize all of those minutes and seconds that you have with the kids to kind of make a difference for them.
Hmm. So, I'm not too sure if we have a title like reading interventionist in the same way that you are describing
Sure.
here for us. I mean, maybe there's something, but I certainly don't know it in that kind of structured and formalized sense. So, what is your role, and what's the primary responsibility of a reading interventionist?
Yeah, so there's two of us in our building.
Mhm.
And so we kind of at the beginning of the year, we take all of the data from all of the kids in the building, and we kind of analyze where is everybody at, reading wise. So what skills are they working on? Where are they falling behind? And if they're falling behind, is it a big enough concern that they're not going to be making progress in the classroom, or do we think that they'll catch up? And once we kind of have all of that data, then we kind of really look and go do some more assessments to see, is it just they're a bad test taker and it's just not catching that they're doing actually okay, or is it that they actually need help? And once we kind of have those answers, we can use our assessments to figure out what they need help in. So it might be that they need help in phonics. It might be something like phonemic awareness. It might be comprehension or fluency. And then once we have those kind of answers as to what they need help on, we can kind of group them, and then we start meeting with them in 30-minute sessions every day to kind of focus on those things. And we send some things home and some things to work on in the classroom, but primarily our instruction is just in those 30 minutes, since we do get to see them every day. And even though it's short, it's really tailored to their needs. So it really kind of hones in on those things that they need the most help on.
So what role do parents play in all of this? How do you collaborate with the parents, and how do they, help in reinforcing those interventions that you?
Yeah. So they play a huge part in it, whether it's just setting that attitude of, a lot of kiddos sometimes, if they are especially older in the upper grades, they don't necessarily want to come to reading intervention because they have started realizing like it's something that they need extra help on. So it's that confidence piece, and they don't want to seem less than their peers. So a lot of it with parents is, helping build that foundation of, it's really just getting you what you need. So helping them have those conversations at home. But it is also, we send home a folder that shows what we're working on, so the parents can read. We give them books to take home too, so that are on their skill level. So reading with the kids, just building kind of that love for reading. We don't want it to be anything too much or too overwhelming at home, because they've already worked so hard at school. But just, having conversations about it, and then obviously keeping the parents updated on where they are, so that if they choose to help work on things at home, they can. But it's really just the attitude that the kiddos have coming into it. And I think a lot of that stems from the way parents talk about it with their kids, and how they kind of approach reading at home too.
Yeah, you make a good point, because in the Caribbean, I think all of us have the experience where a parent would tell you, go and pick up a book.
Uh-huh.
And it's now associated with like a punishment, it carries
Right.
that kind of connotation. So then you feel that it's a chore and you don't want to do it. So do you guys have that experience, and how do you overcome that kind of attitude towards reading?
Yeah, I think too, there is definitely that. And there's also, the battle of reading versus technology. I feel like
Right.
a lot of time, if kids aren't outside, they're on a tablet or playing games. And so reading isn't the preferred activity. So I think there is really a space that, we need to build that love of reading and make kids excited to read. And that comes from a lot of the times if they're able to read or not able to read. So if they struggle, they're not going to want to read for fun or enjoyment. And they're not going to be able to kind of overcome that hurdle. But if we can kind of get kids the help that they need and help them be able to do it, I think that, then they will start to enjoy it. But it also comes from, parents talking about reading with their kids as much as they can, just for fun, nothing, no pressure, but just kind of doing it more for fun instead of like a punishment, like you kind of mentioned, I think is super important because it makes reading seem like a preferred activity, instead of something that we do just because we're in trouble or just because, there's nothing else to do or things like that.
So how do you guys treat with or tackle, I don't know if you want to tackle it, if that's the correct word, just that competing influence of technology with what we might consider traditional reading? How do you navigate that?
It is hard. I will say technology is great,
Mhm.
but there's nothing better than picking up just a regular book and being able to
Mhm.
sit down and read it. So, we utilize technology for certain things, but we kind of tell this to the teachers in our building, and because there's a million ways that they can sit and read on a tablet, but nothing compares to having the actual text in front of you, being able to
Yeah.
see the words, hold the pages. So it's a balance. There's a time and a place for using technology to help read, and then there's a time and a place where they just need to be in a physical book. And I think that a lot of it comes from modeling too. So them seeing you, if you're doing a classroom read aloud, you're using the actual book. You're not having somebody else read it on a computer to the kiddos or things like that. But also just, kind of promoting and setting kind of some limits too on the technology aspect of it. At home is important. But just, I think it all starts from really early on too. So when kids are really little, if you kind of, get books in their hands, and kind of show that example and that love for reading, it kind of translates down the line, for years to come too.
So what are some of the um, challenges you think students face in developing those strong reading skills besides what you're mentioning, the modeling and seeing kind of the example? What are ones that you have come across in your experience of
Yeah,
challenge?
I think that especially in English, things can be very confusing. And sometimes it seems like they don't make sense, but there's always a rule or a reason for why. It's just that it's not always explicitly taught. So kids that do have that experience of being read to a lot as a child, or being in a language rich home, they pick up and learn those things just because they're hearing it or seeing it. But kiddos that necessarily don't come from, a home where they were read to as much, or there weren't as many books, or it wasn't as language rich, they're missing some of those pieces that they would naturally kind of pick up on otherwise. And so it does take that explicit instruction of, okay, this is why it's doing this. This is why it sounds or looks this way. And that's kind of one of the big things that in my small group settings that I see is they're like, well, why does it do that? I don't understand. And so that's kind of one of the big roadblocks, is that they just don't get or understand why it's doing that or functioning in that way. So the more that we can kind of explain it to them, the more it helps. And sometimes it's hard too, because as someone that didn't necessarily struggle to read, I don't always know the answer. I have to kind of look it up myself of,
Right.
okay, this is why. And I've learned a lot through my own education of pursuing my reading certification, about, a lot of it comes back to when these words were created and like their Latin roots or where they came from. And so there's a historical aspect to it too that we don't always think about. And so as kiddos get older, teaching them some of that too is beneficial, because then they can kind of be like, oh, okay, so there is a pattern here, even though sometimes it doesn't seem like there always
Mhm.
is.
Mhm. So I know I asked about the technology, but do you use technology at all to support student learning in your interventions?
So in my groups, not really, which I
Okay.
know kind of sounds wild in the day and age that we're
Mhm.
at, where technology is used a lot,
Mhm.
especially in the general education setting. But we use it every now and then.
Mhm.
So we do a lot of work with like blending boards, which I'm not sure if you're familiar with or if you are.
I'm gonna look it
But
up.
yeah, so they're really cool to help struggling readers, but they're basically like a letter or different letters on cards. And so it makes a word, and the word could be real or nonsense. And the kiddos
Okay.
have to look at it and like say the sound of the letter or letters, and then say what the word would be to blend it together.
Okay.
And they have to know some of the rules as they get into some of the more complex concepts. But we have a physical one. Sometimes I'll pull that up on an iPad or on like our TV or whatever, just to kind of help speed up that process, because since it's just cards. But other than that, predominantly what we do is all the hands-on, multisensory stuff, just because that seems to really make the most difference. When I was in the general education setting, I used technology a little bit more, but I still feel like I defaulted to more of the hands-on stuff, physical paper, pencil, or other fun things to use. But that's kind of where I would always kind of turn to.
And it still turned out to be effective. It's still proving to be
Yes.
effective for you.
Yeah. Sometimes the technology would end up being more of a distraction because they'd find a way to get onto something that they shouldn't. And I'm like, you just wasted all the time that we were supposed to be doing this on this. So, sometimes it helps keep them focused. But there is, don't get me wrong, a time and a place for technology. It's just, especially if they're struggling with reading, I feel like that's a time even more so that we need to be working in the text or with something physical in their hands.
Okay. So as the podcast is called Teachers Have Issues, yes, I will ask you the question, what issues do you think teachers have?
Yeah, so I think it all kind of depends on how you're looking at it. One of the things for me, being a mom of 2 little boys and a teacher, one of the hard things right now is balancing that personal life with your work and school life and wanting to be present kind of in both areas. I think that's something as teachers we kind of struggle with, is that work-life balance. I know, anytime I've been teaching, I would take things home with me a lot of the times, whether it was papers to grade or, an issue that happened in the classroom was weighing on me. And, you kind of bring that home with you and you're thinking about it. You're worrying about the kiddos in your classroom as much as you do, kind of your own kids. And so that kind of is something that's hard because you want to be fully present in both areas and give everything your all in both kind of aspects of your life. And not being able to separate the two sometimes does make that a little difficult because you take things from the classroom home or you take things from home into the classroom. And so I know sometimes that can kind of have an impact on me. And for me too, one of the big things is for having 2 little ones, daycare, the cost of daycare is so crazy right now that I'm actually staying home this school year to kind of be with them, just because the cost of daycare would be as much as I would be making for my salary. So it kind of made sense to kind of stay home with the kids because the money would kind of be gone either way, if that makes sense. So either I'm not working and it's not there, or I'm working, but it's all going towards daycare. So, that's kind of hard. And I love being home with my kiddos, but it's definitely different. The school year just started this past week. And so, kind of seeing all my teacher friends getting ready for the year and getting ready to go see and meet all of their kiddos in the classroom, that's definitely hard too, being someone that thrives on those relationships. It's just kind of, I'm in an odd place, but I just think that's something that, like, in the US, it's one of our big struggles and issues that teachers just kind of have, is that lack of work-life balance, especially with teaching. I feel like we kind of don't do it very well. We don't have a way to balance it. And there's not necessarily a lot of support in place. From the bigger picture, our school is great. Our administrators are great. And they always kind of encourage us to, make that balance, but it's hard when it doesn't feel like there's always that support there to do that. So that's kind of one of the big things that I see as an issue. But then there's also kind of the issue of outside people or influences wanting to influence what you're teaching or how you're teaching, especially if they don't necessarily have a background in education. I feel like, especially here in the US, things have gotten very political on one side or the other. And, everybody has their ideas of what should be taught, what shouldn't be taught. Or how things should be taught. And so, especially as a general education classroom teacher here, that's kind of difficult because you just want to do the best for the kids and teach things the way that your school district or building is kind of taking an approach to things. And so having kind of some of those outside voices or influences trying to impact or change things can kind of put you in a state of flux a lot of the time where you don't know what you're supposed to be doing. And that can kind of be difficult just because you just want to be there for the kids and do your job. And sometimes there's a lot of noise in the background that can make that kind of difficult. So there's just kind of a lot of things that kind of go on. And I feel like it's never really what's going on inside the classroom, at least for me. I know everybody has their own different experience and their own different stories, but some of the things that make teaching the hardest aren't necessarily the day-to-day working with the kids and things that kind of go on that come up in the classroom. It's more bigger picture things that you bring into the classroom or that kind of affect the classroom as a whole.
Yes. We've been seeing that there's well, I think it's worldwide, a mass teacher exodus and sort
Yeah.
of shortages. Has your district been experiencing that as well? And what impact
Yeah.
has that been having?
Yeah, I feel like there's the more that I talk to friends that are teachers or in our building or in our district, there's a lot of people that are leaving education and pursuing corporate jobs. They're leaving to stay at home full time because of kind of some of the things that I mentioned with childcare.
Mm.
It's I feel like a very difficult place. There's a lot of things that are making teaching hard. And like I said, it's not the kids, it's not the teaching itself, it's all these outside things that are kind of making it more and more difficult. So we have had that. We've had a lack of people that want to sub in our building, so that makes it hard too. So we have some teachers that are leaving and not coming back, and then we have teachers, people that aren't wanting to sub in the buildings anymore. So then that means that other people are having to go cover, and they're not getting time to plan or prep for what they need to teach or things like that. So there's a lot of shortages for sure in all the different areas, and it makes it difficult for the school to function the way that it should, the district to do what it needs to do. So yeah, I think that's definitely a big problem that we're facing right now.
Yeah. Shifting back to your role as a reading interventionist here, I was listening to you, and as I said, I don't think we have anything that works. I mean, there are different types of school here, so we have probably it is somewhere, but in the general public school, what we would call
Sure.
government schools, we do have like reading teachers, but it's not like widespread. And I was listening to you because in the general classroom, I think the general teachers encounter students where you know that there's a problem and you don't necessarily know exactly what that problem is. And many times it's the language arts teacher will probably
Uh-huh.
see it because, in the reading and the spelling and the comprehension skills. So in terms of special education, is it that what you deal with in terms of pulling out children with ADHD or children with, other learning disabilities? Is it that how it works? Or is it that it's just children who generally just have problems reading and they may come back into the general education classroom?
Yeah, it's kind of a mix of both. Some of the kiddos are your kiddos that have special learning needs. So whether it's they've been diagnosed with some kind of learning disability, we usually don't see kiddos that are diagnosed with a learning disability in the area of reading, because then they'd go to see a special education teacher for reading.
Oh, okay.
But it might be someone that has a learning disability in math or has ADHD or has something else that it also is impacting their reading. It's just that their reading isn't as severe to the point where they need to see a special education teacher for that. A lot of who we see are kind of those kiddos that they're struggling and there's not really a reason why yet. Especially in the younger grades, we'll see kiddos that are struggling, and we might, suspect that maybe eventually that if they're not making progress, that there could be some kind of learning disability there or something more like ADHD that hasn't been diagnosed yet. And we can kind of help the kiddo and the parents navigate through that process. So our role is kind of like an in between. It's what's going on in the classroom isn't working, whether they have something diagnosed or not, and they kind of come to see us. And sometimes the kiddos just need that explicit instruction, and then they graduate is what we call it, and they make it back into the regular classroom, and then they keep working, and we kind of check in on them to make sure that they're still doing okay and succeeding. And then you have kiddos that kind of stay in our program for a long time just because there's not necessarily anything that they need special education for, but they're still not necessarily picking up on those skills in the classroom, and they need that extra reinforcement, that extra instruction to help them succeed. And then sometimes we're kind of like they'll come to us from the regular education classroom and we're like, okay, well, this isn't working either. So they do need something more specialized. And then they end up going to the special education setting. So we kind of work in a variety of ways, and it just kind of depends on the kiddos and their needs and kind of what's going on.
So what would your role look like if you get a student who is a non-native English speaker or an English as a second language student? What's their role look like
That's
when
a
that
good
happens?
question. We've had a few, but last year was my first experience with kiddos that really had not spoken English before they moved here. We've seen where I teach, where there's been a big influx of kiddos that do speak mostly Spanish, but there's a lot of other languages as well. And they're coming and they just don't know any English at all because usually they're coming at a young age. So they just haven't been exposed. And so what we typically do in our district is we give them kind of a period of time, usually like a year, to adjust to being in the US school system, kind of give them that exposure to that English language. And they'll see our English as a second language teacher. They'll see her and meet with her, our ELL teacher, and they'll kind of help the kiddos learn English, but also some of those reading skills and things that they might need. And if we're kind of still seeing them struggle in the area of reading, and we don't really think that it's because of the language barrier, we'll kind of pick them up and put them in our groups. And even if we think it is, we'll kind of pick them up and see kind of, that will help us see, is it just because they don't know English well enough yet? And do they really need to focus on that with our ELL teacher? Or is it really that there's some kind of reading difficulty that's kind of going on in the translation between their native language and English? So we do work with those kiddos, and sometimes they're some of my favorites just because they, some of the time they don't understand the English words, but they try so hard and they want to pick up on it so hard. And so they're always very hardworking, but it's just a fun experience to see something click for them because they know what it is in their native language, but they don't know what it is in English. So when they make that connection, they're like, oh, so it's kind of neat because you get to see that light bulb, which we kind of talk about with all kiddos when they learn something, but it's really neat when it's a kiddo that knows it in a different way. And then they're like, oh, okay, I know now what you're talking about. So I worked a lot with I had a group of kiddos last year that some of them spoke English better than others. Some of them understood it better than others, but they all kind of struggled with that reading aspect a little bit. And it's fun just to kind of see them pick up on things. And some of them, they weren't all primarily Spanish speakers. I can't remember the native language of one of my kiddos, but it's interesting how they all kind of connect on a different level when they're trying to figure out how language works and then how to read in that language.
So do you find that they get, because I know I'm trying to learn another language, like with Spanish and French when I was trying, you tend to get frustrated and upset because you're not progressing as you should, especially when you're coming into maybe a new culture or anything like that. So if you've encountered that, how do you tackle that when the children face those challenges that they're just frustrated? They know, like you said it perfectly, you know it, you're not dumb or anything, it in your own language, you just don't know it here. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, so they definitely experience that. And I think it's hard on their confidence because they are very bright, intelligent kiddos and they just can't always express it or show it in the way that we're asking them to. So I think that one of the things is like having a variety of ways for them to show us what they know. But just really, again, it all kind of boils down to that relationship and, making it a safe space in your classroom for them to feel frustrated. Like, it's okay for you to feel frustrated. Now, what can we do with that frustration? And how can we find a way for you to show me what you're trying to say or what you know? And just making them feel comfortable to struggle because, a lot of what I do is it's an area that the kids struggle in and they don't want to do it. They come and they're, they like kind of that small setting but it's something that is a non-preferred activity for sure because it's hard for them. So making it a place where they can come and they can struggle and not feel judged for struggling or not feel upset because it is hard, and just kind of having those conversations sometimes with those kiddos of we all struggle and that's how we learn, because I feel like a lot of kids are ELL learners, but also just kids right now, they want that instant gratification of, oh, I've learned it, I've got it. And that's not the case. So we have to struggle, we have to learn, we make mistakes. And so having those conversations with kids and, telling them like, it's okay. Like, it's all right. Making them feel comfortable, I feel like is a huge thing in helping them overcome that.
Do you find that the teachers or yourself notice improvement in other areas once they've kind of navigated the Reading Interventionist program? Because you do see that some of them kind of graduate. As a result of those kind of skills. What impact does that have, kind of moving forward for the students?
reading, I feel like, is so fundamental into a variety of areas. So when we talk about a kiddo that's struggling in reading, we focus a lot on the reading skills that they're having trouble with. But then it also, you can kind of hear the teacher say, well, they're also struggling with math, but it's not, taking two numbers and adding them together. It's when they're given a word problem, they don't understand what they're supposed to do because they can't read the words. Or when we're doing, when we're studying social studies, they can't understand what the question's asking them, or what the text is saying. They don't have that comprehension skill of understanding what the author's trying to tell you about that historical event. So I feel like because reading is so foundational in that way, that once we kind of can tackle some of those issues and make the kiddos feel more comfortable and confident in their reading abilities, it does have a trickle down effect into the other subject areas. It might not take away all of their issues, but it does definitely help them better understand, the subject matter, or with math, being able to read those word problems, they're able to know, oh, okay, now I got to do this so that I can figure out the answer. So it definitely does help in a variety of ways.
How do you stay updated with the latest research in your specific area in reading intervention? How do you do that? Is it
so I feel like there's been a huge shift, and it happened, right kind of when I was starting to do reading. But there's been a more focus on the science of reading, is kind of what it's called. So, a lot of the time with previous methods of teaching reading, it hasn't focused on, how do we really do that? Now it's focusing on, okay, scientifically, what's happening in our brain when we look at these letters on the page and we try to kind of map the letters to the sound and kind of what kind of happens. So there's a lot more research now that's been going on in approaches and tips and tricks through some of the major reading organizations that kind of share helpful things to help the kiddos. And I feel like understanding the science behind how we learn how to read has been really impactful in my teaching, just because once I know, okay, this is what's happening in the brain when you're trying to do that, I'm like, okay, well then I need to do this with my instruction to help the kiddos be able to translate that into their own practice. So there's a lot of different things. And I feel like, especially here in the US, there's been a focus on dyslexia a lot, just because with the science of reading, it's helping us understand what dyslexia is and what it isn't a lot more. And so it's helping you see, how do I help kiddos that struggle, whether they have dyslexia or not, but just understanding that kind of background of different approaches and what a scientifically based approach would be to help the kiddos is helpful. We use a lot of Orton Gillingham approaches in our reading instruction groups. So IMSE is a good organization that shares a lot of free activities or free things that we kind of implement. We've gone through the training with their company as well, and that's been really beneficial. But I feel like now there's a lot of things that are being shared online, and just great research articles that are coming out more and more. And so I just kind of try to keep up with some of those things, subscribing to some newsletters and things like that too, just with the science of reading. And there's Facebook groups. And so I feel like all of those things have been really helpful in just kind of staying up to date with kind of what's going on.
So as we're ending up here, what would you say is most rewarding about being not just a teacher, but a reading interventionist?
Yeah, I think it's when you have a kid that has struggled with a skill so long and they finally feel confident and they feel like they understand it and they can apply it. Celebrating those successes, for some kids, it is graduating out of reading intervention, and that's fabulous. For some kids, though, it's just, I struggled all year on figuring out how this silent E works at the end of this word. And by the end of the year, I've now understood, and I can at least do that one skill, helping the kids, just meet them where they are and figuring out what's a success for them and celebrating those successes with the kids is super rewarding. Because in my role, sometimes they do make a ton of progress and sometimes they don't. So learning to celebrate just the little successes every day and what's a success for that kid is different for what's a success for another kid. So just figuring that out, it really is, that's one of the most rewarding things for sure.
Thank you. So thank you so much, Paige Briggs, for taking
Of
time out
course.
of your vacation to do this. It has been very informative and very interesting to, hear the different perspective, and with this this specific role that you have in the education system. So thank you so much for joining us on Teachers Harvest UCS.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So I want my listeners to know that you empower minds and you ignite curiosity.